Welcome, Relaxx Radio listeners. I am your host, Dan Riordan, with our co-host, Dr. K. And Dr. K is the founder of, and I'm the president of Relaxx.org, which can be downloaded from the App Store or the Play Store at relaxx.org. With us today, we have Suresh Ramaswamy. And Suresh is a transformational teacher, visionary entrepreneur. He's written a book called Just Be, Transform Your Life and Live in Infinity. And we're excited to be diving into this discussion, Suresh. I'm going to let you expand on your background a bit more, and then we'll kick into the interview and discussion.
Thank you, Dan and Dr. Krishna, for having me on the show. It's a real delight to be here talking about these things that are so dear to me. My background is I spend much of my time these days working with people, helping them discover transformation in their lives, implement it, and really take their life to the highest octaves that is possible. So that really is my passion. My background is looking back a little bit over the years. I started in technology, spent many years in high technology, microelectronics, and also in business software. Later on, I became an entrepreneur, started my own thing, had an absolutely wonderful time having that freedom to innovate, to build my own thing. And then, of course, in the last many years, it's been more focused on people and transformation.
Yeah, it's exciting. As we talked a little bit in the pre-show, our backgrounds are similar in many ways, so I always love it when I get to connect with somebody that's had kind of similar career and some of the dynamics that I'm sure you experienced, that I experienced along the way. As we dive into this, there's kind of overarching question, comment that I wanted to get you to expand on, and I picked it up in one of your interviews, but, you know, the letting go of what you think you are is such an amazingly interesting process as you dive into that, and wanted to get you to talk a bit, about that, and then we'll see where that leads us.
Okay, great question, and that goes pretty deep right there.
I know.
We find ourselves, we find ourselves in the middle of life. We're born into a family. We find ourselves exposed to certain sights and sounds and foods and ways of talking and language, etc., that without knowing it, we create this sort of conceptual basis for life. Nobody necessarily tells us, but we kind of figure it out that I think life is about ... And each one of us has our own conclusions on what life is about. And we don't quite look at it too closely. It sort of evolves, you could say, through our, years of growing up, education, higher education, and so forth. And by that time, we have a fairly developed sense of what life is about. And within that concept is a core concept, which is, who am I within this life that's playing out? And usually what happens is there's a whole range of ideas we have in terms of I'm this kind of person, I'm really good at this, my family's like this, I like these sports, etc., etc. And many of these are concepts about ourselves that play into what we think life is all about. So life starts, is full of experiences, of course, and full of feedback. And what happens is, as we start going down the path of transformation and down the path of conscious growth, we start recognizing that there are some things we're carrying with us, limiting concepts and beliefs, that are simply not true, that we have considered to be true. So that's when we really encounter, I need to let go of some of these things. And so we might say, I have some bad habits. I need to let go of these bad habits. And that kind of is easy, common observation. But as we go along deeper and deeper, we find that we have some core concepts which are very close to us. Like this is, I think I'm a good parent, or, I'm this kind of person. I have a high self-esteem, or whatever these things are, good and bad. These actually start getting in the way when we start looking at the depths of who we are and what life is about. So letting go of all these things that we think we are starts becoming critical, because without letting that go, it's obscuring who we truly are. So when we let go of what we think we are, there's a higher and higher likelihood that we'll see what's actually there, which is who we truly are, our own essence, our own true nature. So that's the key idea behind letting go.
No, that sounds like a very good idea, Suresh. And a process. Of course, you must have a process that you tell people. And I always believe that once we have this, like I said, desire pathway, we build ourselves, a cocoon or something that slowly kind of, engulfs us and kind of guides our life. But once you let go, there is an intrinsic force as well, and that force is like the inner you. But one of the biggest challenge I have found is the rate of change. What is the delta? So you tell your mind that this is a belief I want to get rid of. And Dan calls it sometimes cauliflower moment. He used to hate cauliflower, and now he eats cauliflower. So what is the rate of change in this? And how do you increase that rate of change? Because it doesn't happen overnight, I'm sure. You have found in your teachings.
Yeah, a great question. Great question. So this goes to a topic I do touch on in my book, Just Be, which is the dynamics of transformation. It gets to things like, what are the factors that affect transformation? How does transformation get triggered? And then once it's triggered, how is it sustained, and how fast can it go, and maintain stability? Because if it goes too fast, sometimes it can get unstable too. So the rate of change is determined by our ability to trust in the unknown. Normally, we like to have everything figured out, and we like to have all the pros and cons, and we like to have everything told to us, and then we say, okay, all right, I'm going to let go of this thing. The deeper levels of letting go don't work like that. The deeper levels of letting go is you have to have this intuitive sense of the unknown, that there is something there that is wholesome, good, that you're willing to let go into. So what you're letting go, yes, it's pretty clear. But then what's emerging is not necessarily clear. So the rate of change, to answer your question, becomes the ability to consistently and rapidly develop this trust of the unknown, of the mystery of the unknown. And of course, initially we are pretty tentative. But then we see, I think something's working here. Then we get a little more encouraged by that, and we're willing to relax more and trust more, and that leads to more rapid letting go. And eventually, I think we get to a point where we are like a skier who's skiing downhill. You're skiing downhill, you can't keep pushing the brakes every few feet. You have to let go completely, and then you go super fast. So that is you could say, the fastest you can get when you're completely willing to let go.
Yeah, so it seems like what you're saying is that mind can be in your way. And, the trust, the heart of something deeper is where you want to be. And once you let go your mind, then suddenly you pick up the speed of change.
Yes. So, yes. And that's a good point. And we could think of it as, just to simplify it a little bit, the metaphor of using, the car. The gas pedal is the heart. Pressing the gas pedal is like trusting the heart and going into the heart, and the brake is like the mind. Every time I say, well, let me think about it, let me figure this out, tell me more, maybe I'll consider it. Well, as soon as you get into this thinking mode, it's essentially saying, I don't want to go there. It's the brakes. Okay, and even though initially, of course, it is understood that, yes, we want to have some kind of conceptual understanding, the further we go along, the more we have to set aside the mind. If the mind keeps popping up, it's not doing any good there. It's just slowing things down.
So, Dan, how long did your cauliflower moment take?
It is... This progression is a fascinating one, and cauliflower moment, when in that moment where I had a change of belief about something, it took me months in that particular journey to reframe my lifelong dislike of something to something that I had to reopen up and say, wait a minute, why do I dislike this, and how do I reframe it? But it's that process. One of the ways I've come to think about it is we tend to get stuck in the finite world, and we're trying to learn how to express this infinite infiniteness that's in us, but we're doing it in the construct of this finite construct of this life. And that trap of breaking free of the finite and getting to the infinite is all about breaking down all these beliefs that you build up, Suresh, as you were talking there on all of the who you are and the what you think you are. So it's an interesting process, Dr. K.
Yeah, and that's an excellent point, because that's really the crux of the matter, because we have this concept that we are finite beings. And as long as you really believe that you're a finite being, you're going to protect the finiteness. You're invested in it. You're not going to be like, anything is fine. No, you're going to be like, hey, I don't want to get hurt here. So we protect our finiteness, which is an understandable urge. However, the problem is we get so exclusively identified in the finiteness that we really get locked into you could say, a prison that we've locked ourselves in, which is pretty tragic. And so this journey of growth is increasingly discovering our infinite nature, that not just as a concept, but as a real thing. And the more we have this direct experience of our own infinite nature, the more we're like, the finite piece, we're willing to let go more and more and more and more. And we're really willing to step more and more into the infinite, which we now trust because we've actually felt it and seen it. And of course, that continues on until we get to a point where we're established in our infinite nature. We feel so comfortable, confident in abiding in our infinite nature. And we look at the finite as, yes, that's also there, that's also significant, but it's hardly the exclusive reality anymore.
Yeah, it's a really good summary of that thought process, Suresh. I really couldn't agree more, and I get excited when I was just listening to you, and really that experience of letting go of the finite is so much related, Dr. K, to the things you talk about of exploring that inner theater, and kind of levers me into maybe having a quick dialogue with you on the inner theater. But that really does lead you into the infinite.
Yes, Dan, we talk about the inner universe, which has got inner theater or the creativity that we call inner conversation. But I saw that, some of the things I was looking up for Suresh, he's also telling people the process. How do you get to to the point of letting go. You can't just tell your mind to let go. Something that you go and explore inside you. And inside you is not an empty space. It's a vibrant consciousness. It's like living thing, right, Suresh? I mean, is that how you teach your people what to do?
Yeah. So in my books and classes and workshops and retreats, I mean, there's a lot of the practical techniques sprinkled throughout, which is you could say practices to cultivating awareness, practices to cultivate awareness, because we just feel like I'm thinking, so I am this thought. That's the typical starting point, and we have to develop this space around whatever is going on. So our thoughts, our emotions, any concept we have. So there's a whole series of practices that help us create this space so we can actually look at what in the world is going on inside me and understand ourselves, perhaps for the first time. So I have a practice in my book which I call Awakening Infinite Radiance, which is a collection of 4 techniques designed to optimize that exploration of the inner space. So it's like a 20-minute practice, and there are 4 different techniques practiced 5 minutes each, which systematically lead us to our own essence. So it gets subtler and subtler, more and more refined, until we have developed what I call the consciousness muscles to get to that place of subtlety and refinement that we can actually see what's there and actually directly experience it, so we don't have to, buy into anything anybody else is saying. So that's one example of a core practice that I offer. But there's numerous other practices, including, emotional release and so on.
That sounds fascinating. I mean, we have a simple one. The simplest technique we have is the practice of intermittent silence for 10 minutes, which is four steps, but very simple and not many, sophistication there, but it seems to work perfectly well. And that's basically just to familiarize yourself with the inner universe, and then you can take it to deeper levels or different levels.
Right.
But, it seems like basically it's a similar thing that you do.
So among so many things, I mean, I offer this framework in my book, which is a framework for the entire process of evolution, which is not just here's a meditation kind of thing. It's like, how does change really happen? And so it involves, to summarize it very briefly, 3 major phases. The first phase is transcendence, where we consciously, extricate ourselves from just the sensory input and the noisy thoughts and things like that, so we can actually glimpse something that's sublime, something that's truer, deeper within us. So that is the transcendence phase. And following that is the integration phase. This is very, very important, because as we start glimpsing the infinite, then we struggle with keeping the two together. How do I, Monday morning I had to wake up, go to work, I had to deal with traffic, I had to deal with conflicts at work. There's so many things going on in our, real life, so to speak. And integration is, how do I make these two work together? And so it's very important, because without that integration, we develop into highly advanced but lopsided. And there are many examples of this throughout history, where somebody is very developed in a certain kind of way spiritually, and yet at the same time there's a significant shadow which is unintegrated, where there are behaviors and ways of working which are far from, let's say, sublime. So integration is that second phase. And then the third phase is embodiment, which is, how do I live my life from this place? So actually bringing it all down to a life where you can share this, you can embody it, you can radiate it, and you can uplift the collective. through your own presence. So this is the overall macro perspective. And I'll just mention in passing that this is not just like a sequential thing, that transcendence, you go for, 10 years and then integration for another 10 years or whatever it is. It's not like that. It's actually an iterative process where there's some transcendence happening and then there's some integration and then there's some embodiment. This is constantly going on. In fact, if you do it right, you are doing this in a balanced way. So any given time, you are at a place where you are stable.
Yeah, that's really an interesting thought, and we're going to kind of leave that thought as we take a break here at Relaxx Radio, and then we'll be right back with our guest Suresh and further discussions. Thank you. Welcome back to Relaxx Radio. This is Dan Riordan, your host, with co-host Dr. Gay and our guest Suresh. In this segment, we're going to pick up where we left off in the last discussion, and Dr. Gay, I'm going to let you lead us into this one.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you. And Suresh, it was very interesting to see that you were talking about the three phases, but then you had a disclaimer that all these phases are not like a progression of 1, 2, 3. There are many courses and many retreats that are happening around the world. And they seem to have this, like grade 1, grade 2, grade 3. And, it's like you do this chakra meditation, then you do 3 meditation. Then, as if it is phase-wise, and you progress one to the other. Whereas I grew up with the concept that you have like minor explosions, like you do regular meditation, and one of the things we say at Relaxx that bring the peace with you. So yes, you are peaceful, but when you go in the real world, where there is noise, there is activities and everything else, you are in a different phase, but your peace stays with you. Some of the things that you have earned kind of stay with you, but it's like minor explosions. They come to you and they disappear, and then slowly everything deepens and you become more peaceful. But it's not like a phase-wise. I mean, is that what you were trying to get to, that when you said those concepts?
Yeah. So there is a related concept that I think you are pointing at, which is also important. Sometimes we have a tendency to emphasize what I call peak experiences. So, in fact, there are certain paths that tend to emphasize peak experiences, meaning, you do this thing, whatever it is, whether it's a technique or a practice or a retreat, where you go deep and you have this big aha moment, and that itself is considered like the important thing. Now, I talk about the concept of beingness, which is very related to, what you were calling peace, because ultimately it's not about peak experiences. Ultimately, it's about what have you taken from that peak experience that you have integrated into the depths of your being such that it is now part of your baseline consciousness. And that, to me, is where it shows up as beingness. So beingness is this very intrinsic to us. It's our ability to abide in our own essence. In other words, in the depths of who we truly are, as opposed to any finite aspect of ourselves. So when we abide in that, there's a sense of tremendous peace, connection, harmony, joy, all the wonderful things that we want come out of that. So that's how I look at it. Now, the piece that I talked about earlier, that is the broad framework I look at for the journey of transformation. because then it's very useful to have that framework, because there are certain paths, certain traditions which emphasize transcendence so much that you can spend many, many, many years transcending, and then suddenly you're left with this gaping hole where you haven't integrated it. So it hasn't been absorbed into the baseline of your consciousness. And so this can result in some issues in the long run. So in other words, you don't have this balanced, integrated, holistic growth. It's like you go off too much on this side, and then you have to spend another 10 years coming back, and then you go off on another side, and so on. So this framework I talk about helps you stay in a place where no matter where you are, it's relatively balanced and integrated.
Yeah. I love the way you explain being, because when I first saw that just be, it sounded like, a great teacher, J. Krishna Murthy, who says, you don't need to do anything, just be. But what you were saying, and which I believe in as well, you still need to practice, but your level of consciousness just changes, shifts. You are a different, being, or, your consciousness changes to a point where you behave differently. But you still are emphasizing on doing something to make that transformation.
Right. So that's a great point in general to explore, because I do emphasize being, but then I say that, okay, that does not mean you completely turn a blind eye to any kind of discipline or practices or internalization. They are actually pretty important. So how do you view this in the context of beingness? Well, I look at it as you got to start somewhere, and we are typically fairly oriented towards the mind and doingness. This is the typical orientation. So we start there, right? We start there. We say, here's some practices. And as we go deeper into those practices, our mind is changing, our consciousness is changing, our understanding of who we are is changing, and it's taking us more and more towards true being. And the deeper you go into this whole set of practices, the more the practitioner disappears. So there's nobody doing anything, really. There's just pure beingness eventually. So that's the ultimate.
No, that's beautiful, because, I have taken the same concept, put it in a different package in our thing. We call it body, mind, and the flame. So the body is, we all work hard for the body. The mind, we have become super, intelligent people. But the flame of consciousness, and I got it from personal, of course, and other places, we all have an individual consciousness, which is different than the cosmic consciousness that everyone talks about. That individual consciousness is what you are saying, is that, just be. I mean, that is where we need to go and find our own individual consciousness and lift it up. And, which we can work on. And that's not necessarily soul or spirit. So, we are saying the same thing in different terminology. The whole emphasis on that, that we also have to work on the flame of consciousness, not just the body and the mind. And, body and mind has taken us quite far. We should acknowledge that. And we still need that. Even if you work on consciousness, you still need your mind. You still need your body to grow.
Very true.
So, interesting similarity in the concept.
Yes.
This is fun. It's hard to believe that this segment just flew by, but we're going to take another short break here at Relaxx Radio, and we'll be right back with Suresh and some continued discussion around these topics. Welcome back to Relaxx Radio. This is Dan Riordan, your host, with co-host Dr. K and our guest, Suresh. We have been having a fascinating and fun discussion up till now. And Suresh, in this 8-minute segment, we wanted to talk and explore a little bit bit of the concept of light. What is it? And then, the we are infinite beings of light concept, and talk a little bit about how you present that. So I'm going to let you dive in, and we'll see where we go to.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, light to me is an absolutely fascinating topic, because as we start understanding our own true nature and the nature of creation, then we start looking deeper at what is the stuff that we see around us. And initially, of course, we start with what our senses tell us. We look at something and say, okay, this is a brown table, and these are white walls, and things like that, and these are people, and I recognize these people. So we start from a fairly physically oriented, materialistic understanding of creation. But as we start looking deeper, and this is initially helped by science, because science has said, wait a minute, there's a whole lot more here, because if you look microscopically, there are atoms, molecules, and of course subatomic particles. And so this has been very proven, so we're able to go there pretty easily, that we're like, okay, this table is made up of atoms and molecules. I believe that, and I can imagine that. This is where the cutting edge is, because quantum physics starts looking further and further into this, and it starts getting very fuzzy. And this is where, to me, things actually start getting exciting, because this is where we can truly understand the nature of light with a capital L. Because the ordinary light we think about is what I think of as physical light. It's really electromagnetic light, and it by itself is quite amazing. Just looking at how fast it goes, it's mind-boggling. But light with a capital L, which I call, transcendental light, it really starts where we start going into the world of subatomic particles, where you're starting to look at pure energy behind this reality. And then if you keep going, what's behind the energy, you start seeing transcendental light. So, in other words, if you look at the very substrate, the very foundation of the entire creation, you start looking at these high frequencies of light. Now, this is fascinating just to understand, the universe and the galaxies and everything else. But to me, it's especially interesting when we start exploring consciousness within ourselves, because we can use light in a very powerful way. The depths of our being, is not the body. We're way beyond this body. We are energy, we are light, we are consciousness. And so when we consciously connect with light and invoke light, then our consciousness is lit up. It's illuminated from inside. And as we're exploring ourselves, that is a huge leap that we can make. That calling upon light, engaging with light, and seeing our own light aspect. That we do our light.
That is fascinating, because that's what, that's one of the things, as I mentioned in the previous segment, we call flame of consciousness. It is kind of, it's like consciousness is pure energy, like pure light energy. But one of the beauty of a description of that light, it's like the light energy and the sound energy, right? Outside there is you strike something to create sound, and there is a source of light. Whereas the transcendental light that you're describing, the way I see it doesn't have a source. It's just light without source. And the same way, when you have the sound, like, people who have found Om as a sound, it's unstruck, unhatnat. The sound that is created just exists. So that light just exists. The sound just exists. It doesn't have to have a source. I love this verse from Gita, which is Oppenheimer said when the atomic bomb was exploded. And I'll read the English translation. If the radiance of 1,000 suns were to burst forth at once in the sky, that might just come close to splendor of Krishna the Mighty. It's not Krishna. It's the whole consciousness. Yeah, the whole divine energy that, I think, to me, that is, it's not a person, Krishna. It's like how God exists in form of light,
Right.
Yeah, can you expand on that?
You make a good point. It has no physical source like ordinary sound and ordinary light, but you could say it has a source in the sense that source with a capital S, which is, you can say infinity itself that gave rise to this creative intelligence is the source of this. It is not an ordinary source. It's a supernal source.
If there is a source, yeah. Capital S. Capital L, capital S. Dan, what do you think about that?
Yeah, this is so fascinating at the very roots of light and the energy and the kind of the whole body, mind, and flame integration. I've often talked a little bit about as I started eating more pure forms of energy, plants, and the conversion of the light energy within the plant into energy for my body and energy for my entire being, I started to realize that my clarity and the whole operation of my connection to spirituality shifted. And it was in there that I realized that light and the many layers of light were things that, I deeply did not understand, but I realized that this interconnected to the visible and the invisible light was, much grander and much more exciting than I had ever really given pause to pay attention to before that shift. Yeah, it's fun and it's such a fascinating, concepts around this whole awakening. And, Suresh, I think you had some words around the infinite radiance. I had picked up from one of the things I had read, before we got the chance to meet you today, and that infinite radius really does expand as you open up to the awareness of it. So with that, we're going to take another short break, and we'll be right back for our last episode with Suresh and this interesting conversation that we're having today. Welcome back to Relaxx Radio. This is Dan Riordan, your host, with co-host Dr. K and our guest, Suresh. Well, we've been on a fascinating journey in today's episode, and we're going to dive into our last segment here with Dr. K kicking it off, and we'll see where the discussion heads for our last 8 minutes.
Thank you, Dan, and thanks, Suresh, for staying on in our last segment. It has been fascinating talking to you. Your pleasure. Journey from kind of being an engineer to having been your own entrepreneur to transformational coach. How do you transform yourself? What did you do to get to a point where you can help others? You must have done something to help yourself. Tell us some stories if you have any. How do you find your peaceful moments?
Okay. Yeah. lots to say there. Let me paint a sort of overall picture of my journey. So ever since I can remember, I was extremely interested in personal growth for some reason. So even when I was 12, 13, 14, the books I would read are science fiction and spirituality. So that to me was fascinating because I felt like the usual things that I was learning in the world couldn't be the ultimate truth. So how do you find the ultimate truth? So that was my quest from very early on. And thankfully, there's some incredible books that I could put my hands on and digest. It was just amazing. It really changed my orientation. So that's really where I got started with books like, Search in Secret India by Paul Brunton, and books by many mystics and saints in India. So if I didn't mention that, I grew up in India. So a lot of these things, resources I came across growing up there. And it was huge. It really changed how I saw the world. It changed what I did in my spare time. I was always either contemplating, introspecting, meditating, whenever I had some time. So this is just the setting, because I'm going to now fast forward many, many years. This translated into increased meditation, because I realized meditation is what it takes. No amount of reading is going to get you anywhere. And so reluctantly, you could say, I would meditate 5 minutes here, 5 minutes there. But that developed. And so over the years, it went on and on. So eventually, and I'm going to jump quite a bit here, I did like in my college years, I would look for retreats, meditation retreats, which were pretty intense and demanding. So you could say one of my big aha moments was a retreat, a Zen retreat I did, which was extremely intense and demanding. And going into that retreat, I thought, maybe I'll experience the same peace that the Buddha did. I'm going to be doing the techniques he's talked about. And, this is a place where you meditate 12 plus hours a day. Very rigorous. And you do this for 12, 13 days. And what I found was peace that is far from anything that the Buddha experienced. But instead I found something very different, which is I found within me, when I looked at it closely, I could find everything. I could find all the things that I didn't want. For example, anger, jealousy, hatred, greed, desires, so on and so forth. All of these things which we feel like are highly unspiritual, I could see everything was there within me, right? And I could also see there were other qualities of peace and joy and love. And this was, even though it doesn't sound like it, this was like a breakthrough, because I walked away from the retreat having a more fuller understanding of myself and recognizing that I don't need to push anything away. I need to embrace everything. Everything is within me. The entire cosmos is within me. There's nothing I need to push away and disown. So that was, you could say, an unlikely insight into peace. That everything is okay.
Let me hold you here. I know we have limited time, but I love the way you explained. First of all, Dan, and I don't know if you have been to a Zen meditation, but you look at a wall for 12 hours with 1.5 hour sessions. Is that what you had?
Yeah.
And it's just and you don't talk and you don't look at each other. Yep. You're given a cup of tea and some food, and all you do is that.
Starting at 3 a.m. Yep.
Right. No, I have done as well. So fascinating. But what you said, the other thing that struck, that really people should take home, whoever is listening, when you meditate or when you do something, you come across all these, elements in your, like the thoughts, the emotions, the jealousy, everything else. But the more you meditate or the more you contemplate or more you look at that, you can see them as if they have been suspended. So they don't have the same bite. that they had when you did not meditate. So there is a kind of qualitative difference in relationship with you and those emotions that Suresh talked about. Did you have a similar experience, Suresh? You know, like what I'm saying, that nothing goes away. The problems stay, situations stay, just the relationship changes.
That's right. That's exactly right. And that was kind of way back, and since then so much has happened, and I don't know if we have the time to go there, but at some point, let me just say this, I made a leap into where I was guided to share more of this, as opposed to, it just being my own personal private journey. It was something to be shared. So that's when I really started teachings.
Yeah, well, we are quickly running into the end of the show. I want to thank Suresh Ramaswamy for being with us today. Suresh, is there a website that we can make sure people route to locate you and your information?
Absolutely. I would point out two websites. One is justbebook.org, justbebook.org. Second one is radiantfield.org. radiantfield.org.
Great. So radiantfield.org and your Just Be Book. We're excited for people to check out more of your information and experience. I know I've watched several of your YouTubes and interviews, and I think you had a phenomenal one with Anthony Chinay that I watched a while back. So thank you for taking the time today. For the audience, you can listen to this and other shows on demand at healthylife.net, and you can find out more about us at relaxx.org. Thank you, and we'll see you next week.